Oh hey, it's Wes, and today we're going to talk about one of the biggest questions that I receive all the time from everyone. That is, what is the difference between the V1 Pro and the V1? Does it make a difference? Which one do you want? Well, if you've already seen my review, linked up there somewhere, I already talked about the V1 at length and compared them a bit, but now we're going to really zero in on comparisons here. I've been using the V1 Pro for a while, in addition to the R2 Zoom Lithium-ion XS Pro from Adorama. We'll call it the V1 Pro. Now the most obvious and first difference is this. The V1 Pro can mount a sub-flash on the front. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of this. I don't really like the direct flash look, but it's kind of becoming a thing. It's a very popular look to have, to flash directly. So with this, you can flash directly and bounce flash at the same time, or switch between the two, although the switching process isn't super easy peasy. Now, unfortunately, as I found in my full review, the color temperature between the bounce flash and the main flash is pretty different. But if you're big on that look and that's something that you want in your work, all of a sudden there's no comparison, nothing else can do that for you, boom, V1 Pro is fantastic. But let's move on to the other differences that might affect you more depending on your use case. Next up is the overheat protection. Some people, not all by any means, have issues with the V1 overheating too quickly for them. I would strongly recommend never using a flash in any fast-paced environment above 1/8 power. Then you get a lot of headroom, a lot of leeway, just rely on your ISO a little bit more. What if you can't do that? What if that's not in the cards? Well, the V1 Pro is going to give you a lot more. How much more? Let's say by comparison, at 1/2 power within sync speed, the V1 Pro is going to give you 150 shots sequentially without overheating, whereas at 1/2 power, the V1 is only going to give you 60. That's more than twice as many. Then in high-speed sync, the gap gets even larger. This will give you 70 shots, whereas the original will only give you 20 before throttling down the speed. That is a massive difference. And then if we look at the two, you'll see that the V1 Pro is actually subtly longer. It also means that it's heavier. This one comes in at 580 grams, whereas the original V1 is only 530 grams with the battery included. And unfortunately, most of that weight difference is up here in the head. There's a glass panel, I took this whole thing apart, underneath here to protect the front plastic Fresnel element from effects of overheating. It is possible to melt this. It has happened to a few people, but it is highly uncommon, thankfully. And so it's not just that this is a little heavier, it's a little top heavier. And when that's on your camera, that's going to put more weight on your camera hot shoe and more weight on the hot shoe of the flash. Thankfully, these both now have the new metal Godox foot for Sony. If you're not a Sony user, not such a big difference. Next difference, you can use external power packs with the V1 Pro, and that really just adds insult to injury at this point, in that not only can you resist overheating longer, fire faster to begin with, you can add an external power pack and make that gap even wider. And then finally, the last big difference is the battery that it comes with. You can recharge it via USB-C right on the side of this battery. We have the same battery capacity. It's not a super fast charge, but it's a tiny bit faster than the original and much easier to charge on the go. And you can even recharge it while it's in the flash, although I wouldn't really recommend doing that while it's in use. You're gonna get a lot more thermal buildup. Won't be very good for the battery, but if you're really in a pinch and you want to do that, sure, go ahead. The final big difference is our price. We've gone from $260 to $330. That's a pretty big jump. We're going to have to justify that somehow. So what can you actually do with the V1 Pro that you can't with the V1? I mean, it's essentially the same flash. We have the same lean back head, round head, magnetic attachments, design. What's the point of spending all that extra money? Well, in a pinch, or perhaps even just as a matter of course in your life, in your photography, the V1 Pro can do a lot more, can fill more roles. How does that make any sense when it looks the same like this does? Well, when I'm working in the studio, I am normally using the AD300 Pro as my key light. This is my favorite flash of all time. It is so compact, so powerful, fits anywhere. So I use it for just about everything, unless I need like super power, then I'll bump up to the 8600 Pro. But I've got a giant light modifier here. Can I just take the V1 Pro, slap this doohickey on it, throw it in my 7-foot umbrella and just go on as if nothing changed? This is only 76 watt-seconds of power. This is 300. The answer to that question is yes. Yes, I can. I had a studio shoot and I swapped out the 300 for the V1 Pro, but because of that power differential, I had to bump this thing up to 1/4 power and even 1/2 plus 0.3 power, which is really pushing things. And I did not go easy on it. I just took pictures as I normally would. And you know what? I did not even notice that anything had changed. Never once did I encounter thermal throttling, slowdowns, no missed shots, no blackouts. It really did the job. If I put the V1 in that same modifier at that same power, I would have been in trouble about 1/3 of the way into this photo shoot. But to be clear, that 150 shots is only over the period of 10 minutes. And so, if I have this photo shoot and it takes us an hour in the studio, you're talking over 1,000 photos that you can take in a 1-hour period at 1/2 power. Whereas with the V1S, you're only safely taking like 400 to 500 photos in a 1-hour period at that power output. So I would never dare to use the V1 at half power for almost anything, whereas the V1 Pro is significantly more useful. So if I need to swap out a much more powerful flash for a speed light in a pinch, or if I'm traveling light, as I'll be traveling soon, this V1 Pro is much more flexible for that. All of a sudden I don't have to bring 2 different flashes. I can use this to cover more bases. Now let's broaden our scope just a little bit. Our price is going up on the V1 Pro. Does that mean that we should be looking a little further afield here at other things that we can use on camera? So let's look wider. There's also the Profoto A10 and the Sony HVL F60R M2 that would compete at this level. And they're both a lot more expensive. And then there's the Westcott FJ82M that comes in at a closer but still slightly more expensive price point. If we look at this chart, we can see how they all compare. The Profoto is going to give you a faster recycle time, and generally speaking will still resist overheating a little better. The Godox flashes are based on a simple counter method, whereas the Sony and the Profoto are based on internal thermometer readings, so they'll only overheat and throttle if absolutely necessary, whereas the Godox one, you know by looking at the thermal throttling chart exactly when it's going to overheat on you. So there are pluses and minuses there. The Sony has the bend back flash head that both of these Godox models have, which I have to tell you, when you're using a flash on camera, that is life-changing. To not have to twist around to put your bounce flash behind you, you just snap it back. That's fantastic. The Sony bends a little further back even. The Profoto, unfortunately, is just 90 degrees of articulation. The Sony and the V1 Pro can do external power packs. Only the V1 Pro can do USB-C charging. That is huge for me. The Sony and the Godox are both using really antiquated LCD dot screen technology. Very usable and visible, but not nearly as functional and versatile as the newer, higher resolution LCD display on the Profoto A10, and especially not as versatile as the full color LCD touchscreen on the Westcott. The battery capacity on these Godox flashes is higher than anyone else's, 21.45 watt-hour versus 14.4 in the Profoto A10. And I've got to point out that one of the big disadvantages of these Godox flashes is this control wheel on the back. Everyone was hoping that they would ameliorate the control wheel experience on the new V1 Pro, but I have 2 of them here, and they're both terrible. Just barely clickable, and it's so easy to accidentally press one of the other settings while you're turning it. It got worse. And that is really the only major issue I have with this, is that terrible control wheel on the back. Now, a lot of people find that when they're using this, their forehead will bump it and click the buttons, which, yeah, I just did there. Thankfully for me, I have a gigantic nose, and there's no way my face is getting that close to the back of that because my nose is already touching the back of the camera. Small win there for me, I guess. If you're just using this as an on-camera flash, and you don't have need for like a lot more power, a little more versatility and so forth, sure, absolutely stick with the V1 and maybe even just buy a second battery, the battery from the V1 Pro, and stick it in your V1 because that works perfectly fine. And you know, you always want to have a backup battery anyway. And so that will give you one of the biggest features of the V1 Pro in the V1. I'm gonna have purchase links for all of these down in the description below if you want to support this channel and feed my fat cats. So what do you think? Do you think that the upgrade of the V1 Pro is worth that $70 price differential? Or are you just gonna stick with the original V1? Let me know. I am still really hoping that maybe Godox will come out with like a V2 or something that has that new, super easy to use user interface, LCD touchscreen, a nice solid glass screen. Sure, make the screen recessed. It won't be as pretty, but it'll protect it a little bit better. Thankfully, these have much harder plastic screens than the Godox flash controllers. You can see my recent video on that. I do love and prefer the V1 Pro, of course, just because I like to pack light, and if I can get more done with a single model of flash, that's fantastic for me. But I can totally see how this is absolutely not worth it for a lot of people, and that's okay. Not everything is for everyone. So, until next time, let's go take some photos.